Hello, this is Dr. Heath, and I'm making a recording to help you think about the ways that you can look at a movie. Now, I've done a lot of film studies for a long time, so I have a lot of background in thinking about things in movies other than just the plot. So I'm going to walk through the first maybe 20 minutes of A Great Gatsby, and I'm going to talk about all of the things that I see, and hopefully I can help you see a few of those things too. So, what I want you to do is I want you to get The Great Gatsby queued up, and I'm going to start playing it. I would highly recommend you play it with me. Now, one of the things I'm doing with this is I am playing the movie at the same time, and I'm listening to it through earphones, so you can listen to it with the sound down or whatever works best for you. So, I'm going to hit play on The Great Gatsby here and start looking at some of the things I see. Now, the first images are intentionally grainy. Now, this is reminiscent of old-timey film, but it's clearly a digital effect that's been added on to the footage of the intro material for The Great Gatsby. So we're starting off already with an aesthetic, a nostalgic, black and white kind of feeling that the film is trying to evoke for us. This is directed by Baz Luhrmann, and he's doing this all very deliberately. That's another thing you want to think about, is everything's a choice. Now, it starts out again with the old-timey, sort of tinny sounding music that, again, like the scratches on the screen, feels nostalgic to us. It quickly transitions, and just a second ago it transitioned to color. And so it's moving us back and forth between this nostalgic, black and white, sepia tone world to color and to modernity. Just a second ago it started with the voiceover. And the first thing we see in the film is the iconic green light. You see it flashing, you see it coming in and out, and you hear the voice of Tobey Maguire as he reads some of the lines from the original text. So this is speaking to the reading audience who would be familiar with the story and the intro of the original Great Gatsby. Now, when directors make a film, they have to take a lot into consideration. And one of the things is the baggage that the audience comes with, because we all come with a lot of baggage. And some of us, being familiar with the text, are going to be critical of a work that is different from the written text. We see our first image of Toby is him looking down, very dark, very sort of somber, and it scrolls through Nick Carraway's chart. So we see a hint of the trouble that he's been in, and we see the darkness of his face. Clearly, the film is connoting how Tobey Maguire feels dark in his life right now, even though the room he's in is ostensibly pretty bright. The doctor is sitting in the light, there's light coming in from the snowy vista outside, but he is still dark in the scene visually. Even as he approaches the window, and there's a lot of windows in this movie, we see him half in light, half in dark, speaking to his emotional state, his feelings a lot. His tie's a little loose. He's walking towards us, and he's talking about his experiences. He looks a little shabby, a little sad, and the doctor is trying to talk him into how to motivate himself. Even his suit's a little wrinkly. He's got a 5 o'clock shadow. And this scene I like a lot, where the camera pulls away from Toby and it transitions to his memories. It transitions to his past. And what he sees, because it starts to be the story that he's telling us. Now, as it moves into these sort of stock footage images and recreated images of the stock market, we also get the sound of some contemporary music. Baz Luhrmann talked about his choices in this film, and he wanted the music to reflect not the particular moment as much as what the moment meant. He was trying to evoke the 1920s, and the feeling at the time was that the music was new. The music was sometimes from African American jazz artists. The music was radical. The music was forward thinking. And when we listen to the music from the 20s, that's not the feeling we get. So what he wanted to do was create that feeling for us of new and cool and forward and progressive in a way that the 1920s music couldn't possibly do for us as a contemporary audience. Films are always made for the contemporary audience. They are never made for anybody else. So while the story is about the 20s, it is for 2013 when this film came out. So we see here Nick's in his little house next to the big Gatsby mansion, and we get a really sort of quaint cottage. We get a sense of modesty, although I have to say I don't think the house looks terribly modest. But it moves back and forth between Nick's and what Nick sees. That's an eyeline shot where you see Nick look at the girls and they're laughing, or Nick look at Gatsby in his giant house. We also see Gatsby's ring, which foreshadows a little bit of his experience. And we move back now to the scene where Nick Carraway is standing in the psychologist's office telling his story. The film likes to go back and forth between this frame story. So much of the novel is from Nick's perspective and his voice, and so that gives the film a mechanism to convey Nick's internal thoughts and feelings in a way that it couldn't otherwise do, because a voiceover is necessary to sort of understand what's in a character's head. Now we see we've moved into the house with the Buchanans, and the zoom in from great distance is meant to convey the sense of opulence, this sense of great vast wealth, almost ridiculous wealth. Every element of a man riding up to his house on a big horse and coming in, the African American waitstaff is certainly commentary on the moment, commentary on the contrast that this film is trying to create between the rich and the poor. We see Buchanan here point out some of his trophies, talk about his great football days. From the first moment that we meet him, we see and we understand his ego. Now, this is one of my favorite scenes in the movie, with the curtains all blowing into the room. It's magical, it's majestic, it's idealistic. And then we see our first glimpse of Daisy Buchanan. Glittery, silly, ridiculous, through rose-colored glasses, in a sense. Now, Buchanan closes the doors on this sort of ethereal whimsy, which is part of what has happened to Daisy, is that she's had reality come into her life. Then we see the rock on her finger, both evoking her being married and also her wealth, because she and her husband are nothing in this film if not ridiculously wealthy. And that's part of the commentary being made in this story, is the contrast between the rich and the poor. That's what you always want to do, is you always want to get to the meaning and the significance, the implication of these observations. We see Nick in his relatively modest suit in comparison to Daisy and her diamonds and her ruffles. She's almost like a little girl, prim and silly, and making jokes about pushing Nick and the golfer together. Nick mentions looking at her. He's evoking and he's talking about, in some ways, the male gaze, which is an important part of sort of film cinematic construction. It's often designed that men are looking at women, men are objectifying women, men are observing or appreciating, in some ways, the form of women, reducing them very much to sexual objects. And he even has the line where he says that. We get Gatsby's name mentioned to Daisy, and clearly with the sound effects in the back, you get the little nostalgic feeling. You can tell that there's something between her and some memory with this Gatsby. We move on to the dinner scene. Again, more about the wealth, more about the money. We see their relationship built up. They're giving us information about who these characters are. This is largely us understanding who these people are. Tom Buchanan, his comment about the rise of the colored nation, some book he's reading, is about us not liking him. The movie is trying to make him into a jerk here. That he is the emblematic of old money, in contrast to Jay's new money, Jay's ill-gotten gains. But this old money isn't better, it isn't good, it isn't right. And the film makes a very distinct commentary about the flaws in that, the problematic issues in that. That shot of Daisy just there where she had her hand near her face, again, it's showing us the rock, it's showing us the ring. It's being emblematic of their wedding, and looking at the wedding ring at the same time her husband's getting a call from some other woman is showing the hypocrisy of their relationship, that it's all about these symbols, but it's not about the reality of their feelings or their emotions. That it doesn't matter how big the engagement ring is, that doesn't make a good marriage, that doesn't make a good relationship. This ringing becomes important at several points in the film. It's so caustic, it's so loud, it's so abrasive, and it's interrupting this scene and others. It becomes also important in the last scene where Gatsby gets shot, spoiler alert, that so much of this narrative is about creating a mood and a tone, and so much of film does that. For example, when we hear that ringing, it's a warning, it's a dangerous sound. And you want to think about that when you're watching film. You don't just want to look at the imagery, you don't just want to talk about plot. You want to talk about things like the way the phone sounds, because what does it mean? It's about the disruption in their marriage, it's about infidelity, it's about him being an unfaithful person. And it comes up in later points in the film to address these same sorts of issues. It's also a symbol of modernity here. It's a symbol of the coming wave of how things are changing, the progress that's being made. We saw that early on in the scene about where we see the clips of New York, and we see Nick running around in New York in this very fast-moving, fast-paced environment. Baz Luhrmann here, he's doing this zoom in again to the green light, emphasizing its symbolic nature. The book does that too. It's very overt about the meaning of the green light. And while this film doesn't perhaps say the word the green light as much as it shows it to you, and it demonstrates the importance of what it is for Gatsby. We move into the light several times in this film like it just did there. And the camera sort of falls into a solar flare or a flare like it did just a second ago, emphasizing both the significance of the light and how it shapes our perspectives, because the light very much is about Gatsby's hopes and his dreams and his ambitions for Daisy, his illusions about the perfection of what his life could be if he accomplished certain kinds of things. Namely, getting Daisy back and resolving their love story he thinks will make everything better and make everything perfect again. We see that ring again. It shows itself closely to us. Again, his wealth, his symbolism, it echoes her ring, but in black, to where hers is a diamond. But it also could emphasize his connection to the darker elements, the bootlegging and stuff that we find out he's a part of later on in the film. The film plays with this notion of not that F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote this, but that this is a diary of sorts from Nick Carraway. And it's bringing us back to that Nick's perspective, Nick's voice, Nick's opinion about what all these things look like. Because some of this is about Gatsby's idealism, but it's also about Nick's perspective of Gatsby being this fabulous, cool guy that he thinks very highly of, that he admires Gatsby's optimism and idealism, and while it may seem a little ridiculous and idealistic in problematic ways, by setting it specifically in the voice of Carraway, we see how it can be shown to us in a positive way. I love the shots of this town or this space in between New York and East Egg or West Egg, where they all live. Again, it demonstrates that contrast between the rich and the poor. We get the setting, we get the blackness, we get the coal, we get the people of color we see appear in this scene. We also get the place where Buchanan is unfaithful to his wife. We see the space of sin in between the wealthy West Egg places and the financial districts of New York. We see a small glimpse at what the rest of the world is up to in this moment in the film. Again, visible dirt comes with poverty. We see these sort of grimy hands, dark fingers, in contrast with the nice suit, the wealth. And here we get the objectification. We see her breasts before we see her face. We see her legs before we see her talk. That we see her as an object before she gets to be a woman with a name or a particular person. That's pretty iconic and pretty traditional in the cinematic sphere. If you watch a Hitchcock movie, which I would highly recommend, you'll see a lot of that from even on in early film. That women are so much about what they provide for men, what they give to men, what they get from men. Even Daisy was about, her first visual imagery was not her as a whole person, but her hand with the ring. She's about being the wife and being married, even though she soon turns to an affair. Okay, so I have talked about this film for a little while. Hopefully I have given you some good information, some ways to look at things that aren't just the ways that one might traditionally watch a movie where one is concerned with plot all the time, but you look at how the shots are put together, you look at what you're seeing, you look at where the camera moves, you look at, here we have this beautiful red room full of the sort of infidelity that we see in this scene, the ridiculous little dog that Buchanan has bought his mistress. The music in this scene is also very fun. But as much as the sound effects matter, because we don't see the affair, but we certainly hear the affair, that there's so much to a movie other than just the plot. It's important to think about all those different elements. Here we have the sound moving from diegetic to extra diegetic. Diegetic means in the narrative. Extra diegetic means the music that you hear but isn't actually expected to be part of the scene. Like you'll see the orchestra, or you'll hear an orchestra swell when you see a couple kiss. That doesn't always mean there's supposed to be an orchestra in the room with a couple. But this film plays a lot very stylistically with music being part of the scene and also part of the background, and it plays back and forth just in the same way that it plays back and forth between contemporary music and period music. Anyway, I hope I've given you a few things to think about. Always remember, everything's deliberate. You can talk about everything being significant and meaningful. You also want to make sure that you don't just talk about plot, because there's so many other fun, interesting things going on with all of the mise en scène, the sound, the cinematography, the editing. All of it matters in a film. And all of it creates meaning. That's where you want to get to. That's where you want to achieve. Because if you don't get to the point where all of these things mean something about wealth or money or idealism or dreams or whatever your point is about the narrative, then you're not going far enough. You want to use all of these different elements to get to a goal. You want to get to the meaning that you're deriving from all of these components. And you want to make sure you get to that meaning when you're talking about a film. Okay, I think that's enough for now. Rather than talking through the whole film, I will let you enjoy the rest of it if you haven't seen it already. But this one's a fun one because it's so expressive, because it's so over the top. It has a lot of good material that's very obvious. This is not a subtle movie, and that's one of the reasons why I chose it to go first, is because I thought it would be a fun way to start off our discussion of these works. Thank you. Bye.